Lesson 84. In lesson 84, we are going to be 94. You're exactly right. Yes, lesson 94. We are going to be solving multi-step absolute value equations. Okay? You're not really going to feel like this is something new. It's one of those lessons that we're kind of reviewing a previous lesson, but we're just adding one or two little tweaks to it. There may be a few more steps involved, but it's not going to be difficult for you. We're learning to solve multi-step absolute value equations. Now, some important concepts that we need for this lesson. If we are absolute value equations will always split into two equations, right? Absolute value inequalities will always split into two. Unless it's equal to 0, the absolute value equation, that's the kind of the exception to the rule, or if it's equal to a negative. Just like when we did this before, this word always is kind of loose in the terms of equations. Absolute value inequalities literally always split into two. Equations, we have to kind of be careful. There's a couple of exceptions to that rule. Now, but before we can split the equations into two equations, we have to isolate the absolute value part of the equation. You have to get that part by itself before you can split the equation into two different equations. Okay? And then we'll use inverse operations to do that. So let's dive in. So absolute value of x over 5 plus 3 equals 18. What would y'all do first on this one? Subtract 3. Is that what we have to do first? No, it's kind of the easiest way in this one. We could multiply everything by 5 to get rid of the fraction, but less things to multiply. If we subtract 3 from both sides, you should be writing this. Absolute value of x over 5 is equal to 15. Can we split it now? We shouldn't. Right? We need to isolate the absolute value part before we split the equation into two different equations. How would I get the absolute value part by itself from this point? Multiply through the equation by 5. If I multiply through the equation by 5, I'm going to get the absolute value of x equals 75. All right? Now I'm ready to split it, and my two solutions will be x equals 75 or x equals negative 75. That's my solution set for this absolute value equation. All right? It's easy, right? Okay. The next problem is very similar to this one. We're going to skip it. What would you do for this problem?
Subtract 9 from both sides.
We wouldn't.
9.
We would add 9 to both sides, divide by 4. So you add 9, you get 24. Divide by 4, you get 6. X equals 6 or x equals negative 6. Right? This one's a little bit more involved because there's more steps, right? Because we have plus 4, and we got to 5 halves. What would you do first on this one?
Subtract 4 from both sides.
Subtract 4 from both sides, and when we do that, we would get 5 times the absolute value of x over 2 equals 0, right? Do what?
X has to equal 0.
So x has to equal 0 in this problem. Because if we multiply both sides by 2, we get 5 times the absolute value of x equals 0. If we divide by 5, we get the absolute value of x equals 0. And this is the one of the cases where we don't split the absolute value equation. There's just one solution because there's only one number that has an absolute value of 0. And in this case, that is x equals 0. All right, next example. What would we do here? Subtract 3 from both sides. And when we subtract 3 from both sides, what do we get? Negative 2. I'm going to go ahead and simplify that fraction because we can. X over 3, absolute value x over 3 equals negative 2. Did everybody see what I did there? I simplified 2 over 6 to 1/3. What next?
Divide by, no, multiply.
Multiply by 3 and we get the absolute value of x equals what? Negative 6. And then what? What do we split it into, George?
X is equal to negative 6, x is equal to 6. Or x is equal to 6.
Is that right?
No.
Is x equal to 6 or x equals negative 6? Why do we not split this equation?
Because it's negative.
Because absolute value cannot equal a negative value, and this has no solutions. In French, no soluciones. It's the same in Spanish.
Well, we live in America. So.
All right, so you have to be careful. That's one of those examples, guys, where you don't necessarily split the equation. If you split the equation, you get two incorrect answers. So you got to be mindful of what's going on when you're dealing with absolute values and negatives show up. All right, what about this one? What's different about this one? We have an operation inside the absolute value, so we're still going to get the absolute value part by itself first. So to do that, we would subtract 9 from both sides, and that'll give us the absolute value of 2x equals 6 when we subtract. Now that the absolute value part is by itself, what can we do? Now we split it into two equations, 2x equals 6 or 2x equals negative 6. We cannot divide before we split it. You can't do operations. You can't distribute through an absolute value. You can't divide through it. You can't multiply 1/2 and divide. You got to split it and then do your operation to solve for x. So x equals 3 or x equals negative 3. Okay, a little bit more complicated. Let's do this one. Some of you are watching. Everyone write this one down. Okay. What's the first step? Add 8 to both sides. And that gives you 6 times the absolute value of x plus 3 equals 18. But every absolute value equation has two solutions. Okay, and if you don't see the process through to get the two solutions, you get one of the solutions which is incorrect, and negative 3 is not correct. All right, so we're going to divide both sides by 6, see the process through. Absolute value x plus 3 equals 3. And I got that by dividing both sides by 6. Is everyone okay with me skipping that step? X plus 3 equals 3, or x plus 3 equals negative 3. When you split the equation into two separate equations, and we do that because x plus 3 in this expression can be 3 or negative 3 and still have a distance from 0 that's equal to 3. Here we get x equals 0. And here when you subtract 3 from both sides, you get x equals negative 6. It's quite easy to see that first solution. It's a little bit of a stretch to try to do the other one mentally. So be careful. See the process through to the end of the problem and get the solution. George, you good?
I messed up my division. I said 6 and 18 was 2.
All right. What do you think, Buster? You got it?
Yes, sir.
All right. We're almost done. Now, this is one of those problems that looks really, really complicated,
It's not.
but it's not. A 60 centimeter indoor archery target has several rings around a circular center. If the average diameter of a ring is D and the arrow landing in the ring scores P points, the inner and outer diameters of the ring are given by the absolute value equation D plus 6P minus 63 equals 3. Find the inner and outer diameters of the 8-point ring. Okay, so what are we going to do there? What are we going to do there? They gave us the equation we're using, right? And they gave us that. What's that going to substitute in for?
P.
P. And we have to make a substitution, because if we don't make a substitution, we have an equation that has two variables in it. And we can solve two equations with two variables, but we can't solve one equation with two variables. So you make the substitution, the inner and outer diameters of the 8-point ring. Is that correct?
D is 18.
You substituted it for points.
Scores points, P points. So it's 8 points, so we plug in P, 8 for P. So that gives us 48 minus 63, which is
Negative 15.
-15. So our two equations that will yield our two solutions are D minus 15 equals 3, or D minus 15 equals -3, because absolute value equations always split unless they're equal to 0 or a negative number. The two solutions will be D equals 18 or positive 12.
Negative 12. No, positive 12. Positive 12. Right?
Positive 12. Okay? Your homework is page 627. CG 1 through 4, 7 through 12, 14 through 18, 20, 22, 23, and 26. Have a nice weekend and make wise choices.